It's time for make and take number 2, which is this cute shaker card featuring the Gus and Gertie stamp set. You'll start with your make and take number 2 packet and get all of those pieces out, and I'll show you which one we're going to start with. You should have one sugar cube card base along with one larger piece of sugar cube cardstock. We're going to start with the single piece of sugar cube cardstock that fits exactly within the outside card base. Set the rest of those pieces aside, and we're going to bring in our score tool to start with, and we're going to do some scoring detail on the bottom portion of the cardstock. So along the 5 1/4 inch side of the cardstock, we're going to score at 1/2 inch, 1 inch, and 1 1/2 inches. So every 1/2 inch from the bottom of the cardstock until you have 3 score lines. Once you've finished those 3 score lines, we're going to use a die to cut a circle in the top portion of our cardstock. You can see what those 3 score lines look like in the bottom of the cardstock. And now we're going to grab our dies. If you have our stitch circle stacklets, you're going to use the second largest one, or something about equal to a 3-inch circle. So I'm centering my circle die cut from left to right and also from the top score line to the top of the cardstock. Once you finish that, you should have this piece with the score lines and the die cut circle, which you're going to set aside, and then grab the 3 1/2 inch square piece of cardstock and the cloud stencil strip that you received in your kit. These are sold in a set of 3, but each of you received one of the designs to use on your project. We're going to tack that down to our grid paper placemat just to keep that piece of cardstock in place while we do our blending. I'll be using Sprinkles ink along with the blue blender brush. I'm going to wake up the bristles of the brush with my thumb before I add ink to it. I'll add the ink with a circular motion starting off onto my grid paper placemat to get those first intense bits of color before I move on to my project. Then I'm going to brush across the project, making sure that I stay toward the base of the stencil. I'm not brushing over the entire piece. That's going to leave the part at the top a little bit more white. And then as I pull it down, I'm going to concentrate my inking right at the base of the stencil, leaving part of that opening white and part of it with the blue ink on it. I'm also varying the stencil as I move across, kind of moving the stencil and shifting it left to right to give those clouds a more dimensional, realistic look by shifting the design just a little bit. When I get to the bottom, I like to add a little bit more ink so it's not so stark white at the base. When that is done, we can set that piece aside and we will pick that up again in a minute. So now we're going to do our stamping. You should have this piece that is a negative and a positive of the Gus and Gertie on the scooter. And you have that same image on your bulk panel along with the Enjoy the Journey sentiment that we'll be using later. So you want to set up that stamp in your MISTI so there's plenty of space around it to line up that negative die cut piece. I'm stamping this down onto my grid paper first and then taking that negative aligned die cut and placing it perfectly over the image. I taped it in place at the top to create a hinge, and then I'll place that piece back inside and then stamp my image down. You can stamp more than once in order to get a really crisp black, and then you can just poke your die cut piece out of that opening. We'll do our coloring next. We're using 4 Copics. R29 will be for the base of the scooter and the handles. Then we'll be using C1 to color in the metal parts of the scooter, so the small diagonal piece that connects the handlebar and then the rest of that handlebar. I'll be coloring the Gertie the Birdie with 2 colors of Copic. I have YR21 first and then YR12 to do a little bit of shading at the bottom of the bird. Now that we have that finished, we're going to assemble our shaker element. So we have this opening along with a piece of acetate. I'm going to adhere the piece of acetate on the back of the die cut portion, covering that circle completely with the acetate. I like to use tape runner for this because liquid glue tends to squirt out and then you get it all over your acetate and it makes a big mess. Next, we're going to adhere that cloudy piece down to our card base. We want to do this at the top of the card so that there's even spacing left, right, and top of our card base. Next, we're going to use foam sticky strips to build the wall around our shaker element. So I'm going to take this first piece and follow the left and bottom of the circle around, making sure that each of the pieces butts up against each other. Then I'm going to use one full piece across the top. That's going to help us when we begin to fill our shaker to have one full piece across the top of that shaker area. So now I'm going to remove the backing from all of the pieces except the one at the very top. When we adhere this down, it should leave the top of our shaker element open so that we can easily pour in our shaker bits. So take that small baggie and shake them inside of your shaker element to decide if you have enough before you peel the backing off of your project and place it down. So now that will be closed and nothing will shake out of your shaker card. Now that we have that shaker element finished, we'll do our sentiment. I have an acrylic block here that I'm going to set up Enjoy the Journey, using that etched alignment guide to make sure my image is straight. If you don't get it quite straight, you can always do it again or flip over your piece of cardstock. Then use your paper trimmer to cut this down into a strip. You can cut a little bit more off the side if you want to, and then use a scissors to flag that angled up towards the left. Now we'll finish adhering the project with our tape runner, putting that Gus image along one of those scored lines, and then adding our banner at the top left. Now your shaker card is complete, and I hope you had fun and learned something new from Make and Take number 2.